Welcome, everyone. I want to first say that we're so glad you're here for this workshop on self-love abundance. Last week, well, first off, my name is Annette Oltmans, and I'm founder and CEO of the MEND Project. And we provide free workshops each month to take a deeper dive into various topics related to emotional abuse, or the secondary layer of harm that so many victims face that we call double abuse. And this happens when they reach out for help and they're not responded to with compassion and support. So we call that double abuse. And this month is special because we added an additional workshop in order to quickly provide you with hope for healing as we talk about self-love abundance. Last week, we talked about self-love deficit disorder, which is what an author and therapist, Ross Rosenberg, he uses that term self-love deficit disorder instead of codependency, because codependency is, well, it's just has a different meaning to different professionals. And it also sort of implies blame. And so I don't like that term either. Self-love deficit is really part of what attracts you to abusive personalities, because you have a lot of self-doubt that you might not even be conscious of. So today we're going to talk about solutions. And as we go through our time together, please be sure to share your comments and questions in the chat as soon as they come to mind. And then we'll address them during our question and answer period. We love it that you post them in the chat as soon as possible, because then Jill can organize them and it just makes it easier on her. If you want to remain anonymous, don't worry about that. We protect everybody's privacy. But if you are extra cautious, you can send a private comment or questions directly to Jill Rice, and you'll find that in the drop down in the chat box, who will share your questions anonymously with the group. And we really encourage you to send your comments, because answering questions and hearing your comments and questions really enriches our conversation and our time together. If you need to hop off before we're through today, don't worry about that, because we record every workshop, and you could head to our training and resource page on our website where you will find the recording and also videos on other topics that might interest you, or you can go to our YouTube channel. If you registered for today's training, we'll email you the recording so you'll have it. In previous workshops, I've spoken about trauma bonds and codependency, and how I do prefer the term that Ross Rosenberg uses in his book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. And this is the book, Human Magnet Syndrome, that I really encourage you to get. I think his approach is very thorough and thoughtful. Many of you have been asking how you can heal from self-love deficit disorder, and if there is hope. And yes, there is hope. And I'm excited about today's topic, as it's a message of hope and will bring insight to bring you healing and restoration. Both self-love deficit disorder and the solution, which is self-love abundance, are thoroughly discussed in this book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. So I'm just encouraging you to get it. I appreciate his view that in order to heal and resolve any disorder, which self-love deficit disorder is a disorder, it needs to be replaced with something that leads to positive or improved mental health, improved self-identity and self-value, self-worth. The treatment for self-love deficit disorder is self-love recovery, or achieving ultimately self-love abundance. In his book, he uses a visual of a pyramid to describe the different steps that either describe self-love deficit disorder or the steps to take for self-love abundance. And so I hope that if you didn't see last week's workshop, that you'll go back and listen to that after listening to this workshop. The two pyramids show multidimensional aspects of the invisible problems, the subconscious problems, and the multidimensional solutions, which takes a lot of hard work for self-discovery to really understand yourself and your beliefs, your faulty beliefs about yourself, and maybe faulty beliefs about your relationship that where you place more responsibility on yourself than you do expectations on your partner if they are abusive. The self-love abundance model contains a beginning and an ending points that move in sequence, and they require specific conditions to be met and the specific challenge to be over. So at each stage, each challenge needs to be worked through and overcome before moving up to the next step or the next objective that needs work. So in order to be successful in the next level or the next stage, whatever you want to call in your learning process, the previous stage needs to be thoroughly worked through and completed. It needs to be mastered. So if a stage is missed or not mastered, the person's mental and relational health will still be compromised. And moving up the pyramid will not be successful because you won't be ready for that next step. So there are no fast ways to get there, but it gives you a great toolbox to draw from to at least map out what your plan is for yourself or with your therapist. And I think a lot of these things, it's so helpful if you can work through them with a therapist or some professional, because there's some aspects are complex, and it really helps to bounce those off of somebody who's experienced. So in the process of self-love abundance, don't feel that you need to rush. There is no rush. It's a process, and it'll take some time. The 10-stage model of self-love recovery treatment is what I'm going to talk about now, but I'm first going to take a sip of water. Okay, so stage one is hitting rock bottom and introducing hope. I have a question for you. Have you been so uncomfortable about your situation or relational dynamics that you have reached out in desperation for help? Or are you still protecting your partner and using your efforts into hoping that they will change? And so I would love it if you would share with us in the chat where you are in that journey. Are you, do you feel that you're over functioning? In other words, working really hard to take all the responsibility for the relationship and hoping that your partner will change? Or have you come to the point where you have now reached out for help to either your pastor or friend or family member or a therapist? I would just love to know where you are in that stage. If you could submit that in the chat. Jill, do we want to pause for a second, or shall I keep going?
I'll share what's come in just real quick, and then there might be more that trickle in, and that's okay. If we need to move forward, we'll get to them. This one says reached out and eventually left. So somebody who left the relationship, and then another person said that they've gotten help.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and that's it for now. And some may still be typing, and that's okay. Keep sending your message. If
We would love to hear from you. Okay, so hitting bottom or the lowest point will compel the self-love deficient person to do something uncomfortable, bold, and hopeful, and that is reach out for help that you so desperately need and deserve to end a lifelong servitude really is what it is to pathological narcissist in your life. This is the moment when all the damage done becomes overwhelmingly evident. So often in abusive relationships, it's so confusing that you don't recognize that it's actually abuse. I mean, that was true for me. I was in a relationship for 15 years before I realized, I don't know what this is, but I just can't take it anymore. I was getting really sick, but I still was so confused. And that's very common. So when you get to that breaking point, you know that you can no longer stand up under it all. And you start talking to a trusted friend or a therapist about pain that you're feeling, or maybe shame about the truth about your relationship, the loneliness that you feel within your relationship. And as ironic as this sounds, this is when hope for true, deep, meaningful healing enters the scene. Because this is the point where you start to gain clarity that if you have a good helper who you're confiding in, where you start to gain clarity about the dynamics of your relationship, and that you are, in fact, a victim of a form of domestic violence. If you don't yet have that clarity, I just want to encourage you to go to our website and download the terms and definitions. It's a free PDF that will describe, and with definitions, so many confusing and manipulative behaviors that constitute abuse. So it will help you determine whether those behaviors are playing out in your relationship. And by seeing them in writing, it will really give you clarity about your situation. Okay, so that's rock bottom, and then gaining clarity. Stage 2 is human magnet syndrome education. In stage 2, a large amount of educational content is presented and reviewed, and the person is educated in pathological narcissism, narcissistic abuse, things like gaslighting, blame shifting, and other manipulative strategies that an abuser employs to keep their victims powerless. It's ploys that they use to power over and control their victim, even if it's very subtle and it's hard to describe. These terms and definitions will really help you articulate and explain to others what you're experiencing. And this stage is when you really educate yourself about what these behaviors are. And this is when the treatment of what self-love abundance looks like. So there's critical discussions happen regarding the birth of when self-love deficit disorder took root, and how and why attachment trauma and core shame and pathological loneliness are its core elements. And this comes from a disruption in your attachment to your primary caregiver. That's what causes us to doubt ourselves, to feel maybe I'm unlovable, or maybe something is intrinsically wrong with me, or maybe I don't know how to do relationships well. Maybe this is my fault. That those kinds of self-degrading attitudes are part of the problem. They are the problem, but they come from childhood, and oftentimes they're unconscious. So it's becoming consciously aware of what caused you to have those beliefs about yourself. Discoveries about family history and the family tree also happen during stage 2. It's during this stage that you begin breaking free from the dance, from the dynamic that you're participating in an abusive relationship. Stage 3 is withdrawing from self-love deficit disorder addiction. During stage 3, the concept of self-love deficit disorder addiction is discussed, processed, and mastered. Understanding the addiction, its origins. It's really addiction is a strong word, but it is trauma bonding comes from self-love deficit disorder. And it's almost an addiction to your partner, that you want them to soothe your wounds that they're causing. So they're responsible for creating, harm in the relationship. And you look to the very person who's harming you to actually comfort you. And even though they may not be capable or may not have the ability to be empathic. And so this is a time when you understand the addiction, its origins, its withdrawal symptoms, and the impossible seeming odds of overcoming it can prepare a person to begin the process of battling pathological loneliness and core shame. Shame would be, in this context, would be feelings that you're inferior or not worthy of being treated much better than you're being treated. During stage 3, intimate relationships, if you are separated from your partner, this is not a time to engage in new relationships. You're not ready for that yet. You'll end up repeating the cycle. So he really recommends that there's no intimate relationships during this process. Excuse me. Stage 4 is preparing for the narcissistic storm. Stage 4 is an educational stage similar to stage 2, where power, control, and domination strategies are deconstructed along with gaslighting, triangulation, personal alienation, so many other toxic behaviors. Ross Rosenberg says, forewarned is forearmed. So during this preparation for the storm, the self-love deficient persons are taught interaction mechanics and the consequences that may come from implementing boundaries with a narcissist or an abusive person. All narcissists are abusive, but not all abusers are narcissists. So I use the word narcissist quite often because that's the more pathological person. But you become educated about what will happen when you set boundaries, what potentially could happen. It might go well for you, and the opposite might happen, where the narcissist ramps up and retaliates. It's during this stage that the self-love deficient person learns to observe what's happening and consider it as important data rather than absorb what's happening, a technique that needs to be mastered. In other words, it's imperative to do the work to identify narcissistic behaviors that you are specifically experiencing being used against you, so that you can thoroughly recognize these behavior patterns and be prepared to receive them without feeling blindsided or getting caught in the narcissistic dynamic that is played out in your relationship numerous times by responding as you may have repeatedly in the past. You learn new responses because you're so educated about, you've studied the terms and definitions on our website. You really have broken down the patterns of behaviors that are being employed against you. You understand what they look like so that when they come up at you, you're not blindsided. You see them for what they are. How often have you been in an abusive dynamic and it takes you a week even to process everything that happened and to maybe journal in order to figure out that you were gaslit and that, or that you were blame shifted or minimized or so many, it's hard to unpack when you're in the moment, but by really studying the behaviors that your abuser employs against you, you will be forewarned and forearmed to respond in better ways. And it prepares you best for the next stage of personal growth, which is stage 5, setting boundaries in a hostile environment. Stage 5 is all about implementing well-planned boundaries that are intended to ensure your safety or break free from the control and domination of your harmful partner. You are changing the dance and the dynamic in the relationship by implementing newly constructed responses to narcissistic abuse. This requires preparation for potentially harmful, even dangerous reactions from the angered and agitated narcissist. But it's not always, you are the best person to be able to determine whether you think that it will get to a dangerous level. And so I want you to proceed with caution and really analyze your situation to see how safe that you feel. But setting boundaries can also have a very positive effect because it changes the dance and it removes you from that abusive vortex that you get sucked into. It's more a refusal to engage. You set the limits and then you follow through with consequences. But the changes the self-love deficient person makes will cause major shifts in the relationship. And this is a time that will likely require the help and support of a qualified, well-trained therapist, because this stage takes a great deal of courage and commitment, and really overcoming your fears about what may happen and or your fears that you may be discarded or abandoned by your narcissist. We have so many internal feelings from self-love deficit disorder that many, and I remember being in this place myself, I had such a fear of abandonment, which really came from my primary caregivers, that I was afraid to set boundaries because my husband would employ the silent treatment for extended periods of time. And so I feared that. And so I was afraid to set boundaries until ultimately I just had to learn to overcome my fear of abandonment and set those limits in order to, change was not happening until I worked to change myself and my beliefs about myself. So it takes a great deal of courage and commitment and a willingness to implement boundaries with tangible consequences. Changing your responses can be a very scary process, especially if you have not completed the prior stages and if you don't understand your role in the dynamics. Your prior work, unpacking your addiction to the relationship, or things like fearing that the consequences will cause, for me, it was abandonment. For you, it might be some other fear, maybe fear of your partner raging, or any number. I don't know how every abuse case is different, but you need to be aware of what your fears are and work through that in the prior stage. Ross Rosenberg is not saying the dynamics are your fault. Responsibility for the abuse, and I want to just really affirm this myself, is solely applied to the person causing the harm. With that said, your earlier faulty beliefs and thinking patterns and the responses you previously implemented, such as accommodating the abuser or being sucked into that vortex I just mentioned, that chaos, imply that you do play a role in the dynamics. If you're willing to change your responses, you can change the dance. You may not be able to change the abuser, but you will start to, changing the dance will start to care for yourself in better ways. And we don't have time to go through all of the details of what a change in the dance would look like and how it may result, but and every situation is so different, but it's an exercise of self-discovery and really discovering the relationship dynamics that you need to go through. If you're comfortable at this time, I'd like to ask you to share your fears around setting boundaries with consequences in the chat. Many thoughts may come to mind. Feel free to share any or all of them as you think of them. I'd really like to hear what your fears are, and I'll have Jill share them with all of us anonymously. It's common to have fears around setting boundaries, very common. Most victims do fear setting boundaries. So it's helpful for everyone to hear and to know that they're not alone. So I would love it if you would share some of that with us in the chat. Jill, let me know if you see any comments.
Yeah, we have some great, we have a lot of participation here in the chat. So thank you so much for everything.
Yes, thank you.
Here, and we'll get to it, but I do want to, just to answer your question, I do want to share these responses as they're coming in. And this is great. They're hopping in really quickly. Okay, so anger and rage from the abuser, which is really common. He alienates the kids from me even more. Anger from him and verbal abuse. Rejection, the person's rage, losing the relationship, being blamed. Retaliation, he likes to play games and will give, quote, payback for whatever he feels was done with him has to be done back to me. Fear around setting boundaries, regardless of the boundaries I set with my family, they are constantly overstepping them, and I don't know how to deal with that. The boundaries I set are meaningless to the abuser, so I'm not upholding them. I'm using power and control with authority. And then with setting boundaries, my fear is that my husband, who I'm separated from right now, he will not see that he is the problem. He will continue to see me as the one with the bigger problem. It's my fault. A lot of really good responses and really common. Here's another one. So far, I have done all of these steps and I have been very successful. The boundary phase was difficult as I received a lot of retaliation. However, I had tremendous amount of support from my loved ones, which allowed me to persevere through the retaliation.
Oh, that's so helpful. It's very hard to do alone. And so, and it's scary if you don't have people supporting you while your abuser is emboldened to retaliate against you. It's very scary to be alone in that, because if you don't have people that understand what you're going through, they'll minimize it. So I just really encourage you to find a safe person that you can confide in. Maybe even go online to your local domestic violence shelter and join one of their courses, or I love Natalie Hoffman's Flying Free program. She has a support group where you'll be with a lot of other people going through the same process, and it can be very helpful, even if it's just online support. But it's setting boundaries is scary, but when you stick with them with consequences and you carry them through, you may have to set the same boundary and carry it through many times before the abuser realizes that their game playing is not going to it's not going to diminish your ability to set the boundary. It takes fortitude, it takes endurance. But it's really the only possibility for change. And yes, you may be discarded and you may be blamed. And that's where the earlier stages in this process helped prepare you for that, because you have done the work to really identify it. And so you expect it to happen, and you just view it in a way that doesn't internally affect you as much, because you are stronger, you're healthier, you have a better belief system about yourself, and realizing more and more that you deserve so much better, and that kind of maltreatment is hopeless. You can't have a healthy relationship with that kind of maltreatment playing out over and over. And so it's a process to get there. You need to get strong in order to set boundaries. And that's part of what the earlier stages are for. So
want to share one more quick one that came
Sure.
because this is really common, and I don't know that we address this, but fear of being wrong about what I'm seeing. Am I the problem? And also being called too sensitive. And I think it's back to what you're saying, that can be turned, but also so many times, people who are being harmed, they really do question themselves and take a hard look at their own self and wonder maybe that they're the problem. And so I thought that was really
Yeah,
wonderful.
it's worth a response because your abuser is never willing to self-reflect.
Right.
You are being self-reflective. So you're the empathic person. You are the compassionate person. You're willing to accept blame, which almost 100% means that you are not responsible. So it's really understanding the terms and definitions, the behavioral, the abusive behaviors that are being employed against you. Really understanding those will help set you free to see that you are looking at this accurately. You have the proper language to inform you, to empower you, that this is not your fault, and that there's frankly not much that you can do to change their choices to behave this way towards you. So it's so common that victims are empaths. That's part of codependency. That's part of self-love deficit disorder, is we're overly empathic. We overly function. We work extra hard on the relationship. We're willing to look at ourselves. We actually think something may be wrong with ourselves. And so that's just all the more data that you need to understand it's likely not you, and that you need to do the work to really be able to unpack the abusive behaviors being employed against you. So during stage 6, that's maintaining self and secure boundaries. During stage 6, the self-love deficient person begins to demolish the remaining buildings or ensure that they are brought up to code. So that's just a metaphor for that you will not tolerate the dynamic as it was before, and you have the strength to hold the boundary and to enforce consequences. Ross Rosenberg says it begins in the rubble of the earthquake-affected vicinity. Empowered and confident, the healing self-love deficient learns how to manage boundaries, intrusions of those boundaries or breaches of those boundaries. And when necessary, they may need to set an absolute boundary that says no contact whatsoever with a pathological narcissist. That's what I had to do. I had to just completely stop having, I had to separate and stop having contact, because every bit of contact was so traumatizing. It was so crazy making that the trauma, I couldn't settle the trauma in my mind and body while I was continually being re-traumatized. So stage 6 is about protection. It's about security and self-care. You need to be willing to allow the consequences you have set in place to play out regardless of their potential outcome. I had to get to the place where, even though I had those fears of abandonment, I had to get to a place where, okay, I'm probably going to be abandoned. And I had to just know in my heart that I couldn't tolerate what was going on anymore. I had to be willing to face into my fears and allow the consequences to play out and see what would happen. And ultimately, those boundaries resulted in my husband going to intensive counseling for 2 years before he was really healed from narcissism, and we were able to reconcile. I didn't think we would ever be able to reconcile, but that ended up happening after a 3-year separation. The first year was mostly retaliation. The second 2 years, he actually was really working, he realized he was losing me. I was not coming back. And he really worked really hard, frankly, to unpack all of his faulty beliefs and understand his behaviors and the trauma that it was causing. But you need to be willing to allow the consequences to play out. And that's a scary thing. And so you need to be strong enough from the prior stages to be able to follow through with that. And if you've not worked through feelings such as fear of abandonment or fear of retaliation or fear of raging, it will be much more difficult, if not impossible, to carry out this stage of really holding on to your boundaries. Stage 7 is resolving and integrating unconscious trauma. So resolving unconscious attachment trauma, that's from your primary caregivers from childhood. The self-love deficient person needs to dredge up long forgotten, suppressed and repressed memories and core shame. This needs to happen in a safe space, as it can be painful and it can be sad when we reflect on certain painful memories we have from childhood and how, I mean, every parent has failed us, and I, as a parent, have failed my children. So everyone has had some type of trauma in their childhood or experiences where they feel shame. And this needs to be processed. It's the nitty-gritty healing of attachment trauma. This is where this healing takes place. And this is the glue that keeps the trauma-attached person where they can unstick the glue, where they can counteract the glue, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. So it's really important to go through this process where you look back at your childhood traumas and unpack them and really process through those to see how it helped create you to be the person that you are today. Stage 8 is building an internal self-love foundation. A self-love abundant person needs a fortified foundation in order to enjoy their future. The groundwork up to this point helps to create a sturdy and resilient foundation. Those seeds that were planted will bloom, and the self-love abundant will grow stronger and more autonomous, where you won't feel so attached to the person who's harming you. Boundaries are firmly set and adhered to, and they experience greater levels of emotional safety. You're secure in yourself. You are so much less affected by how the other person responds. And glimmers of self-love begin to appear where you actually believe in yourself and you believe that you're worth more, and you begin to separate emotionally in a strong and secure way from the abuse that is happening. The self-loving person is very different from the lonely, shame-based, and broken person of the past. Finally, they fall in love with themselves, which is so important for you to really love and care well for yourself. And you too can fall in love with yourself. Self-love is infectious, meaning once it's felt, it feels so good that it spreads quickly to other parts of your life, and other people notice it in you. You have a sense of security because you realize you're a good person and you are worthy of being treated well. You treat others well and you're worthy of being treated well, and that anything else besides that just doesn't have space and room in your life. It's just going to tear you down, and you get to a place where you're just not willing to be torn down anymore. You love yourself enough to get to that place. Stage 9 is building an external foundation of self-love. Now, what does that mean? It means that you're established with a solid foundation of self-love. And now is the time to invite people into newly constructed home of self and use their mindset of emotional and relational skills and abilities. You are now ready to integrate your new belief system about yourself with others in relationships. And mistakes are going to happen. It's inevitable because we're not perfect. So giving yourself grace and self-compassion are so important as you test your new found freedom in the way that you had viewed yourself in the past. So once you reach the stage, you need to know that you deserve to be kind to yourself. After all you've been through, this is the time to courageously spread your wings, expand your social network, and become safely and vulnerably connected to other self-loving friends and or a partner. This is when you would be more ready to engage in a new partner if you decide to leave your current situation. Stage 10, the last stage, becoming self-love abundant. This final stage is infused with strength, empowerment, and self-love. The person who has mastered self-love abundance will never subject themselves to the poison of a narcissist or an abusive person again. You will see the red flags so easily and you will avoid it like the plague. You won't tolerate highly controlling, powering over people, whether it's in the workplace, in family relationships, friends, or an intimate partner. You'll experience a sense of peace and protect your emotional freedom, which it's so amazing. I just want to encourage you. The process was hard for me because it took me a long time to get the clarity to understand what had been happening. It took me almost a year to figure it all out. And so it delayed me really working on my beliefs about myself. But once I did and really felt secure, once I went through the hard work, I was in therapy twice a week, and I just read so many books and did a lot of work. It was so worth it because I don't view myself in the same way that I did before. I love myself. I know that I deserve to be loved, that I'm a loving person to others. And it's so freeing and beautiful to be set free from that loneliness that I felt by being disconnected, not firmly rooted in healthy attachments with friends or with my abuser, and so forth. It really set me free, and it's a beautiful process. So I wanted to just briefly, I'm opening up page 224. I just want to briefly go through the stages really fast. So the 10 self-love abundance promises is what I'm going to talk about now. The first is the identification and understanding of the self-love deficit disorder's root causes. And then it's the resolution of long buried attachment trauma. And then it's the neutralization of specific levels of core shame. And number 4 is the eradication of pathological loneliness, or the self-love deficit disorder's insidious withdrawal symptom, where they tend to isolate and not confide in people. Number 5 is an ability to sustain self-love deficit disorder addiction recovery, to stay the course, to not quit, to really stick with the process. And number 6 is the end of the need to self-medicate vis-a-vis the human magnet syndrome. In other words, self-medication looks different for so many people. It could be drinking, it could be drugs, it could be desperately trying to overfunction and work to get the positive attention of your narcissist. That's a form of self-medicating, but it doesn't solve any problems. It creates more problems. Number 7 is the shifting of attraction or chemistry patterns towards self-loving individuals. So you begin to see the red flags and you aren't attracted anymore to the type of person that is insidious and pervasive in their harm against you. You recognize it and you're more attracted to people who love themselves and are secure in themselves and treat you with loving kindness. Then number 8 is the emergence of a reflexive repulsion response when in the company of pathological narcissists. You just identify it, you disdain it, you see it for what it is, and you don't want anything to do with it. And then number 9 is the emergence of existential peace, the ability to feel whole and happy just because you are yourself. And that is a wonderful place to get to. And then 10 is the permanent transformation to self-love abundance and the permanent disappearance of self-love deficit disorder. So I just wanted to read those to you because I think it's so motivating to hear. It's just 10 stages. It takes work, but you can accomplish most of it in a couple of years of therapy, maybe faster if you work really hard. And so if this workshop today has made you more aware of your inner human magnet or how it keeps you glued to the narcissist, and you are ready to begin the steps towards healing and self-restoration, then I want to encourage you to secure an abuse and trauma well-trained therapist and begin the stages to self-love abundance. Some of these things you can do without a therapist by just deeply doing the work and reading materials and investing, like maybe even going to an educated friend, someone who can help you really, who will speak positively into you and that you can confide in. There are other ways, but I just really encourage a well-trained, trauma-informed therapist. This is the path to healing. It's the path to recovery, and it is possible. And if you aren't ready or just need some time because this was all a little hard to hear, take your time. You know, it's a process. We process internally, and sometimes we process better when we can talk it out with someone else, but it is a process of getting to that first place of clarity, of understanding your situation, and then the stages that you need to go through. There's a lot to process in that. So don't pressure yourself. So this will be recorded. Feel free to come back to this and listen again, or pick up a copy of The Human Magnet Syndrome. But in closing, I wanted to invite you to stay connected to us if you aren't already by joining our mailing list, where you will receive our blogs, our newsletter, and updates about training courses. Please head over to our website and sign up today and continue along this journey. So now I'd like to take the time for any questions you may have. Please feel free to drop them in the chat at this time if you have any. Thank you.
Yes, Annette, we have one question here, and I have a number of things that I want to share with you as well. So the question says that it would be helpful to know what parts of the work we can do on our own versus what aspects we must use a therapist.
I think if you get the book and you read, it's mostly about the self-love deficit disorder. The end of the book is about self-love abundance. I think if you get the book and you really unpack how you're thinking about yourself, you'll be able to identify areas that you personally need to work with a therapist, and what things you may have aha moments where just reading and understanding solves the problem for you, or you can understand that, you know, you need to do an exercise like every day, standing in front of the mirror and speaking positive affirmations to yourself. There's so many tricks and ways that you can begin the process and work at home on your own. But I think by reading the book, you're going to better understand what for you need professional help to work on, where you really feel stuck, where it just keeps playing out over and over again, and you feel like you're not able to get over a fear or past, you know, like setting a boundary that you feel you just can't do it, then that's where you need to go and get some professional help. But I think by reading the book, you will understand more about your self-love deficit and identify the issues that you have within yourself, because we're all different. Like I said, I feared abandonment, and it was really a roadblock for me. And so everyone has different fears. And so I think that's the best way for me to answer that question.
Thank you, Annette. I'm going to share a couple of comments before I go to another question. This comment says it's very challenging to try and work through the journey because people will doubt what's being said. Education about narcissism has helped. I'm thankful there is material available. And then another participant said, these talks are the only time I feel really seen. I'm so grateful for this outlet. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I founded the Men Project because I had such a hard time finding resources. Like I said, it took me a year to gain clarity of the behaviors that were being employed against me. I had to reread journals, and it was just too hard to unpack without resources. And that's one reason why we just wanted to make this available, so people could find them more easily. And even if like you couldn't afford a counselor, at least you would get to the place where you had an aha moment and could recognize that you're being victimized, which is a huge first step to get you out of that stage of stress and confusion. So thank you so much for that affirmation.
We appreciate knowing we can be a safe space here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question that has a bit of a caption. So if you need me to pause or read anything and repeat, just please let me know.
Okay.
I had a very bad experience with Life Crisis and using their attorney in court. My representative with Life Crisis sat there and did nothing in court on my behalf, and there was plenty of evidence on my part that needed to be voiced. It was as if she was paid off to not say anything. With that said, they issued a 50-50 in a protective order case with my daughter. This made it easier for him to get to me through my daughter. This has been such a hard issue I am dealing with, and divorce is in future court dates in the months ahead. How can contact be stopped with children involved? He uses the children as a pawn.
Well, if I'm understanding the question, how can contact be stopped? You know, you can, I mean, if there was a protective order in place, you can make arrangements that you either have a friend do the drop-offs and pickups, or that you do the drop-off exchange at a police station or some other place that you feel comfortable, where you won't have to engage with your ex. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I know that, I mean, I'm sorry that 50-50, that just sounds horrible. It happens so often, and I'm sorry that your advocate let you down. That's unconscionable, really. You prepare them, you inform them, and then to have them stay quiet, that it's heart-wrenching. I'm so sorry. But I would look for maybe requesting that a judge require that you create a drop-off and exchange situation where you will feel more safe. But your ex is going to contaminate your child's thinking. That's just what they do. He's going to put you down. He's going to portray you as being somebody very different than who you actually are. And my encouragement to you is to not get caught up in engaging in those discussions with your child, but rather to just be that steadfast person who's so interested in your child's well-being, interested in their schooling, in their extracurricular activities, in how they're feeling, helping them really get in touch with their emotions, really helping them increase their emotional IQ by talking about emotions, doubt, worry, anxiety, like really opening up and helping your child grow in their emotional IQ. So there's so much that you can find online about that. By doing that, your child will be able to more readily see the contrast between two parents and will see you as a safe person who never engages in putting down the other person. I mean, there are times that you need to say, I'm sorry that happened to you at your dad's house. That was wrong. That's not, and you can do that, but you're not bringing your problems to them, and you're not burdening them with adult problems. You're more being a person there for them, totally focused on their well-being and educating them. It doesn't need to be in an obvious way that you're educating them, but if you keep that as an objective, that you want them to become emotionally smart, that'll really help.
Really good. Thank you, Annette. I have another comment I'm going to read here, and then I do have one more question. The comment says, I never felt like there was something wrong with me. I always knew it was his problem, even though I didn't realize it was abuse for over 2 decades. I stood up to him, but that just caused his violent raging to get worse, which took a toll on my mental and physical health, causing permanent issues. Once my health had deteriorated so severely, I just kept my mouth shut and didn't stand up to him anymore. That's when I divorced him out of fear I was going to literally die. And I share that. I want to say to Annette, it's great. Annette likes to hear the comments so she understands who is all here. But I think it's really important for all of us to hear, because those comments that come directly to me, and I want everyone here to know you're not alone if you resonate with any of these. Or if this is you sharing this, you're not alone. There's so many people.
There's so many stories similar to yours. I mean, it was my physical health that ultimately resulted in me having the courage to say, I can't endure this. I'm going to die. I'm going to get cancer. I mean, my doctors kept wanting to put me in the hospital to figure out why my white blood count was so low. And I mean, it just really depletes your immune system. But I'm glad that you got to the point of where you were able to leave. I'm sorry that it took 2 decades. It took me 15 years before I put my foot down. I mean, it's very confusing, but I'm glad that you care about yourself, and that you saw that standing up for yourself was just going to bring more wrath, and that you needed to self-protect and self-care. And I'm happy that you made that choice and that you're now free.
Absolutely. We have one more question here. I'm going to share, Annette. It's 11 o'clock. If anyone has to hop off, we'll stay on to address this question, and it will be in the recording that will be sent to you this week. The question is, I am in stage 9, moving into stage 10. I started dating and I'm able to see things much more clearly than I did. One aspect I have come across more than once is the person I am out with on the first date with an exclamation point wants to talk about my marriage and divorce, specifically asking questions about why I got divorced, how my kids reacted, etc. These are very personal questions that I do not want to answer on a first date. This has happened more than once, and I have given vague answers. I have decided if this comes up again, I will say, I don't really talk about my divorce until I get to know someone. Can you expand on this or possibly give a better response to this?
I think that's a fantastic response. It's you're setting a limit when I get to know you better. But I do also understand, like if I was dating somebody that was divorced, I would want to know what happened. I'd want to know. I want to know if they're problematic or if they're slandering their ex, or if, I don't know, I could just see that I would be curious and I would pick up on character issues in that conversation. But I can perfectly understand that you don't want to get into all of that. It's a heavy conversation, and you need to first find out if you even like this person before you confide in them. So I think that just gently saying, let's just take some slow steps to get to know one another. And if we decide we like each other, then there will be a time in the near future where I'm happy to share that with you. You know, something like that. I think what you said was great.
Yes, yes. And that is all for questions at this time.
Okay. Well, I thank you for joining us. I hope you find this helpful. I encourage you to get the book and to take advantage of our resources in our classes. And until next month, when we have our next workshop, take good care. All right. Bye-bye.